The growth of young adults in the registered apprenticeship system has been enormous. It's grown by over 100% in the last decade. And I really do think that if we're able to seize a lot of the energy that young people bring, that we'd accomplish far more than we realize and make our labor market and economy a lot more resilient.
Hello, this is Barbara Humpton, CEO of Siemens USA, and welcome back to the Optimistic Outlook podcast. Something you'll hear me say often is that U.S. industry can only grow as fast as our power grid enables it to. Well, there's another side to this. Our power and manufacturing sectors can only transform as quickly as our available skilled workforce. We need people with the training and skills to work with advanced technologies who can bring together the real and digital worlds. As industry and infrastructure transform, it's creating new and cutting-edge career opportunities for people to pursue across a new industrial tech sector. So how do we connect more people to these opportunities? How do we set them up for lasting success? Over the past couple episodes, I've explored with our guests the need for skilled talent in this industrial tech sector. What we're going to do now is highlight efforts that are helping to address the challenge by inspiring people early and building the networks to support their training. I'll let Taylor White, the director of the Partnership to Advance Youth Apprenticeship, also known as PAYA, explain more. And I've invited David Etzweiler, the CEO of the Siemens Foundation, to guide this conversation. The Siemens Foundation is a nonprofit organization squarely focused on making workforce development opportunities in manufacturing, healthcare, and clean energy available to more people in the United States. The foundation was a founding partner of PAYA and has been a longtime advocate of apprenticeships for opening doors to new skills and careers. Let's take a listen now to the conversation between David and Taylor.
Let's start by better understanding the mission of New America's Center on Education and Labor.
Sure.
Give us a little background on that.
Sure. So New America is a nonpartisan, nonprofit, essentially a think tank based here in DC. And we think a lot about modernizing the workforce system. How can we meet the demands of a changing economy? How can we ensure that education and labor policies are aligned to support economic mobility? And so a lot of our work focuses on community colleges, on apprenticeship, on other pathways into the labor market. And increasingly, we're doing some work looking at what makes a good job and how do we support programs and policies that really allow more and more Americans to access them. So New America leads PAYA, Partnership to Advance Youth Apprenticeship. We have since 2018, but we've done that with a coalition of national partners that we picked and recruited in the early days, largely because we understood that they had stakeholders and expertise that we would really need to reach our big moonshot goal, which I'll talk about in a second, but also because we had a sort of shared vision for the direction that post-secondary pathways space was headed. So we worked really closely with national organizations like the National Governors Association, Advance CTE, which is the advocacy association here in DC for folks who lead career and technical education systems across the U.S., the National Alliance for Partnerships in Equity, Education Strategy Group, Jobs for the Future. And then we have two place-based partners, one in Colorado, CareerWise USA, and the Charleston Regional Youth Apprenticeship Program in South Carolina. And those are two of the nation's strongest and fastest growing youth apprenticeship programs that we recruited in as national partners so we could be sure that all of our work was informed by practitioners who are really doing the hard work on the ground. Our big moonshot goal since then has always been to establish youth apprenticeship as a mainstream post-secondary option for young people in this country. And we've advanced that mission through sort of three verticals of work. We have a small grants program where we support public-private partnerships that are operating at the local or regional level and trying to build these programs. We've supported 15 community partnerships across the country to do that work over the years and are looking forward to expanding that this year. We also have a virtual learning network that works with about 90 communities now. That's like 3 times the size when we launched in 2018. So the demand is growing and growing. And they collectively enroll just under 20,000 young adults in apprenticeship programs across the country and work with over 6,000 employers. Wow. And that far exceeded our expectations from when we started, that we would see so much demand so quickly. But I think it's testament to the benefits these programs provide and the growing interest from students and families and employers.
Right. Certainly a big part of what we'll talk about today are apprenticeships and youth apprenticeships in particular. So I'd love for you to help us and our audience better understand sort of what apprenticeship and in particular youth apprenticeship is all about.
So apprenticeship is one of the oldest forms of education and training that we have the world over. The general idea of apprenticeship has always been that apprentices hone their craft under the supervision of a master craftsperson. They learn on the job. They, at least in modern iterations, typically have some kind of structured classroom training that gives them the technical skills that they need to succeed in a particular job. And in most countries, and most of our European peers, apprenticeship begins when students are in their late teens. And it's been sort of a core part of their education systems for centuries. In many other countries, apprenticeships exist across the economy. So think, yes, the trades, yes, construction, but also in healthcare, in IT,
Right.
in banking.
Right.
But here in the US, the average age of apprentices is closer to 30. And for most of our history, apprenticeship has really lived in those building and construction trades. So at its most basic, youth apprenticeship takes the same model and asks, why can't we start this sooner? Why can't young people be on this path that has proven, at least here in the US, in our system has proven very successful. These programs culminate in credentials and college credit, occasionally degrees. They match young people and have them work under the supervision of a skilled employee mentor, so they have a chance to develop, real world work relationships and professional networks. And they're an employee, just like an adult apprentice in the US would be. They're developing skills and competencies that prepare them for full-time employment or further study. And so ultimately, the youth apprenticeship model here in the US, as it's evolving, they're learn and earn opportunities that give young people a chance to get paid hands-on work experience, which is harder and harder to come by for young people today, to develop professional networks that we know at this point in our careers are invaluable, and to earn credentials and college credits and really get a head start on a low to no cost college credential or degree that they will need in the labor market. The growth of young adults in the registered apprenticeship system has been enormous. It's grown by over 100% in the last decade. And so figuring out how we can continue to support that growth while maintaining quality, making more robust data collection so that we can continue to understand how these young people are faring post-program and into their careers are two things that we're keeping our eye on.
It's so interesting to see and to talk to those apprentices too. I mean, I think that's part of what you're talking about is kind of changing the understanding and approach to youth apprenticeships. And in my mind, one of the biggest selling points for us is when you see a youth apprentice, you get what it means in terms of bringing common dignity and joy and direction.
Yeah, I mean, young adults, teens, they get a bad rap in this country, right? We talk a lot about early education in the US, and we've invested really heavily in early ed policy. And that's in part because we have a ton of evidence that shows that brain development during that age period of children's lives happens really quickly. And so it's a chance to really influence their development over the long term. But what you don't hear people talk about is that the teenage years, the sort of late teenage years, are the second and a close second in terms of brain development. And so we often say about young people, they're risk takers, and they are. They're sort of primed to take risks because that's how they learn from experiences and challenges. And I've always been really interested in how poorly we harness and take advantage of that prime development period. And I do think one of the really interesting things about youth apprenticeship is that it allows young people to get out into the world, to sort of try on possible selves, to be contributing members of a community, a workplace, but also their communities in a way that our system just really has not provided options like that at scale for young people. And I think as models like this emerge and become more popular, we'll see that young people are better prepared to succeed in our economy. But I think we'll also surprise ourselves by how much they can contribute to our communities and to civic society as well.
I totally agree. And so much of this is, I think, for folks who aren't as familiar with apprenticeships, is these are not internships. This is a full-throated bringing somebody into the workforce with full expectations of a worker. And that just transmits something very different to the worker and to the business. With that as background, what are we seeing in terms of approaches and acceptance of youth apprenticeships among parents, among school counselors, among students? And I'll kind of double up on you here. What is it that businesses and industry can do?
Students love the idea of something like an apprenticeship. There is a lot of survey evidence emerging that young adults today are looking for pathways that are college connected and career connected, but maybe somewhat different from the kind of four-year bachelor's degree that people have aspired for generations. And so I think we see increasing demand from young people in models like apprenticeship. And I think the most robust models of youth apprenticeship can deliver all of the things that young people are looking for and more. I think we also see demand from parents, and we've done some focus group work where we put in front of parents, youth apprenticeship provides paid work experience.
Yeah.
It provides low to no cost college credits for your students or credentials. It can lower college debt. It can still get your kid a great job.
Right.
And they're usually almost unanimously in favor of it. It's actually interesting. We did some focus group work in Indiana, and some of the youngest parents in that group were millennials who carry more student loan debt than any generation before them. And it was really interesting to see how scared they were for their children to incur education debt.
Yeah.
They told stories of their own experiences. We had one mother in Indiana who had a bachelor's degree. She had borrowed close, six figures, and she was working and running a business that had nothing to do with her degree. And she expressed a lot of resentment towards this idea that she needed college to succeed in her field. Now, college still delivers a wage premium. I'm certainly not arguing against college, but the idea that parents are increasingly skeptical of the idea that incurring huge amounts of debt is a necessary step, or should be a necessary step towards launching one's career, is also adding to this interest in models like apprenticeship and youth apprenticeship from young adults and their families. But the question of employers, I think, is an important one. What are we hearing and seeing from employers? I think employers are eager to find new pools of talent. They're interested in finding ways to address upcoming massive waves of retirement, address labor shortages, et cetera. And so we do see a lot of interest from employers in the idea of apprenticeship and youth apprenticeship. Certainly the growth in the registered apprenticeship system, which is the sort of U.S. federal apprenticeship system here, suggests that the demand is coming from both sides. I'll be honest, though, and say convincing employers to hire 16, 17, 18-year-olds is a challenge. And I think for those who do, they learn very quickly. It's worth the risk, but convincing them to take that risk is the biggest challenge. And employers report all sorts of really interesting outcomes from participating in the programs, everything from the kind of standard return on investment conversation that people have to things like, we had one employer say to us, we hadn't realized how terrible our onboarding was. We really had poor systems for communicating management expectations. Or this has been a great opportunity for us to have some of our kind of emerging management level folks take on new management responsibilities that we couldn't have otherwise just sort of created organically. So I think that there are a lot of benefits that surprise employers when they participate in these programs and hire youth apprentices. And the one that we hear often that, always makes me laugh, and I don't think is surprising to anyone who's worked with teenagers, is that they come in with a lot of energy and a lot of ideas, and they can fix everyone's phones and computers.
It's an interesting dynamic you're describing, because there is the employers that I've talked to, and there's been a lot of them. There is an energy that is infused into the work environment. And I can remember one of the earliest conversations I had was about the effect on older workers. Like these older workers who are thinking, what's my next stage? And suddenly they're mentoring with youth who are interested, they're curious, they bring a lot of skills and competencies that a lot of us who are further along in our careers don't have. And it's just a whole different mindset. I'm imagining a community college president or administrator or somebody in a local business thinking, this sounds like a great idea. What would your advice be to somebody in that situation?
If you're at a technical or community college, our first step is to look actually at your own campus. Often these programs exist. They're not necessarily well known, and they're not necessarily operating at the scale they could on campuses. So that's an easy one, kind of low-hanging fruit. I would also think about checking in with systems offices and state apprenticeship offices. Some states have agencies that operate apprenticeship systems within the state. Others work directly with the U.S. Department of Labor, but every state has somebody that's coordinating apprenticeship. And that can be a useful place to just say, like, what is going on? What supports exist? I mean, are there tuition subsidies that exist for apprentices? Are there incentive structures for employers. Many states have tax incentives to hire apprentices, for example. What exists currently that could help me do this? The other thing that I would say, whether you're a community technical college or an employer, is to work with industry associations in fields that are of priority fields. And chambers of commerce. I do think we underutilize those structures as places where we can bring employers together to work on talent development issues. It's a lot more efficient when employers work together on these things. Those institutions, industry associations, chambers of commerce, they can play a very important role in helping to communicate that message and recruit partners on board. And when there's more demand and you aggregate that demand, it's a whole lot easier. It spreads the sort of risk and costs of starting these programs around in ways that make it a lot easier for folks to come on board and get started.
So much of what you're pointing to, I think, gets to what the foundation has focused on over the years. One is these require ecosystems. This is a collaboration and a partnership between business and labor and parents and students and school counselors, the government. And so that can feel overwhelming, but so much of what you do is provide the technical assistance, the best practices. Hey, this has been done before. Here are the barriers and opportunities. And you put that in place. And then the momentum's there. Because as you said, once you see businesses who suddenly have been infused with, tremendous talent, then it tends to take off. One of the barriers that I think we've had in the U.S. is there's sort of has been this sense up until more recently, hey, that sounds like a great idea for my neighbor's child, not so much for mine. And now there's a much better understanding of what's happening here with not taking on much debt load, if any at all. This is a floor to a career, not a ceiling. All those other possibilities are out there. The building of the ecosystems and the communications that I think is such an exciting moment right now for what's happening.
We would describe what you're talking about there, David, as possibility models to help people understand what could this look like, right? And then to equip them with the resources they need. And then also working sort of a level up at the state level and the federal level to say, hey, these things are working. There's a lot of interest and demand from your constituents.
Yeah.
What do you now do to create this ecosystem, this sort of infrastructure to support this field as it grows?
Help us understand, where are those maybe traditional sectors that are growing and growing well? Where are some of those sectors that you look at and you say, yeah, these are really emerging as sectors that are growing? And I'll add a third piece to that, which is, are there sectors out there that aren't yet on the radar screen that you think, gosh, wish folks would kind of think through how apprenticeships could be applied in this place because it's just ripe for it.
We were surprised in our most recent data collection to see that there were programs in more than a dozen industries. I would say where they're most popular, where we see the most growth are in fields like healthcare, education, advanced manufacturing. And we do see a lot of interest and growing demand in the skilled trades. But I'll say sometimes sort of a full apprenticeship program can be difficult for a young person in those trades because there are labor laws that prohibit certain types of work before they turn 18. So there's growth and interest there, but I think still some barriers that we have to figure out and some different program models that might make more sense in those fields. Those are industries that are growing in the apprenticeship system as a whole. I would say some areas where it's been a little bit trickier to get some of these programs started, and we're still trying to get to the bottom of why exactly, because I think the use case is there, but getting the programs up and running has been a little slower. I would say in IT, information technology and cybersecurity are areas where there's a lot of demand from young people, a lot of demand from businesses, but sort of matchmaking to get those programs up and running and scaling has been a little bit slow. One area where we see a lot of demand from young people, but perhaps slower demand on the employer side are the creative arts, sort of broadly defined. And then I would say in the reverse, one area where we see a lot of growing demand and interest from the employer side, but it's a little bit of a harder sell for young people right now is public sector apprenticeship. There are a lot of states that I think have really embraced the model or will soon embrace the model to promote it. And young people just don't really understand what public sector jobs are or could be, or how
broad group of jobs,
and how they can be launch pads to careers in particular occupations in the private sector. If we unlocked that, the growth potential for those for apprenticeship in the public sector is huge.
The only question for all of us, of course, is how do we accelerate the pace of that? Because we're impatient for a good reason. We've introduced this concept of possibility models into the conversation, and I want you to move forward with that concept and tell us how those kinds of models and the work that you're doing at PAYA gives you hope in the coming years.
I'm always optimistic about the sort of power and potential of young people. And the weeks and months when this work feels really hard, anytime you talk to one of these young people, you're sort of immediately brought back to like, okay, this is why we do this. And I really do think that if we're able to seize a lot of the energy that young people bring, that we'd accomplish far more than we realize and make our labor market and economy a lot more resilient too. I'm also cautiously optimistic that the momentum behind apprenticeship, and in particular youth apprenticeship, will continue. The economy will have a lot to do with that. But I do think that the growing and developing expertise in particular industries that are relatively new to apprenticeship, but offer really high potential pathways for young people into good jobs is exciting. So I think about healthcare as one of these where we see enormous demand. I think we must get 4 emails a week from different hospitals or different systems across the country saying like, how do we build these programs for young people? Because, there's a lot of interest and a lot of need. And so I do think the growing expertise of these industry partners is really promising because as you all know, businesses are competitive. They don't like when their competitors get good ideas. And I do think if we can tap into that across multiple industries, it will even accelerate the momentum that we see from students, from families, from policymakers. And I think that's sort of the last frontier of unlocking the demand for this kind of work.
Lots of possibilities. Taylor, thank you.
Thank you for having me. Very happy to be here. And we're enormously grateful for your thought partnership and continued support for this work.
Thank you, Taylor and David, for such an inspiring conversation. Youth apprenticeships are a win-win for both students and industry, and I'm thrilled to see how PAYA is creating a network of partners for their long-term success. As always, check out our show notes to learn more about everything you've heard in this episode. PAYA, the Siemens Foundation, and our commitment to workforce development at Siemens. And head over to my LinkedIn page to share your thoughts with me on this topic. I love reading your comments. And thanks again for listening.
Please follow us on social media and on your favorite podcasting platform. Thank you for tuning in.